You got Mac here on Birds 365. We're adding another JM to the mix. He writes for The Athletic, covering the Cowboys day in and day out. His podcast about the Cowboys, not to be confused with How About the Cowboys. Very well done if you're a Dallas Cowboy fan. We like him for his Cowboy insight. John Machota joins us here on Birds 365. JM, I've got an intriguing question for you. Has The Athletic asked for you to renegotiate your contract because you haven't needed to do quite as much work as some other reporters around the league because the Cowboys have done next to nothing this offseason? Have they asked you to redo your deal because you're not quite earning that big paycheck these days?
Yeah. I'm thinking about what I need to say here because I want to make sure I'm hold on here. This is how we'll put it. John, okay. John will be able to relate to this, I think, in this business. The way the NFL has become 365, just because your team doesn't do anything doesn't mean that you're not expected to write things. They have really, the NFL, my hat's off to them. I love covering an NFL team, but for me, outside of, even if because they haven't done anything in free agency for over a decade, but other than that time between maybe at the end of OTAs before they go to training camp, there's like maybe that 3 weeks there to a month.
Yeah.
Other than that, and then also when you cover the Cowboys, that's prime arrest season. So I'll be honest with you, we still have to write almost every single day. Yeah. And then obviously, Dak Prescott was in the news because of a lawsuit with a female from 2017 with an alleged sexual assault. Yeah, so there's always something going on with the Dallas Cowboys, even though they aren't doing very much in the first week of free agency.
Yeah. My wife, every day, I'm sitting there writing John shit. What are you doing? They don't play. And
right.
She still doesn't get it, no matter how many times I try to explain. But anyway, no, I agree with you. But you bring up the Dallas Cowboys, and it's so interesting to me because this reputation exists because of Jerry Jones, and he's really one of the most conservative owners in the NFL. It's been that way, as you mentioned, over a decade probably. Why does it still exist that the Cowboys are going to be the splashy team? That's the Eagles. That's not the Cowboys. The Cowboys are slow and steady, man. They don't do a lot, especially in free agency.
It's interesting because the relationship that Jerry Jones has with Stephen A. Smith is always one that I find very intriguing because those two do a good job of driving it. Stephen A. Smith, obviously not by himself, but the national shows love to include the Cowboys anytime that there's a big name player, even though they haven't really done many moves for big name players. That's one. And then two, especially this offseason, Jerry did a frustrated fan base no favors by making these all-in comments back at the Senior Bowl. And then when we were in Indianapolis 2 weeks ago now, we're sitting on his bus and he's trying to explain it. And obviously we're asking him several follow-ups to try and get his explanation. And to most of us on the outside and to most fans, when he says all in, it's not like you have to go to, I think it was the 2011 Eagles offseason where they went and got, Vince Young and Nandi Esma.
The dream
right.
Team,
Yeah, no, and that didn't lead to any success that, where people would be like, we need to copy that. But that's 2011. You look now, it's like ever since the Tom Brady to the Bucs, every year there's been an NFC team where you're like, that team was all in. And every one of those years, that team got to the Super Bowl, whether it was that Bucs team, the following year, the Rams, the Eagles, and then this past year, the 49ers. So when Jerry says this, and he loves the whole, like, well, I won't be completely clear because about me, it also angers the fan base when you don't do anything the first week of free agency because they think when you say all in, you mean you're going to be making these big moves, while Jerry was never going to do that. And you are completely right in saying, a conservative move right off the bat. How many GMs in the league would have kept Mike McCarthy for a fifth year after the way that this past season? I'm not saying all of them would have passed up on him, but if Jerry was super aggressive 90s Jerry, I think he makes a different move there.
And I think it's pretty damn simple to understand. You don't have to be a capologist and an in-depth NFL fan. If you're a good, solid NFL fan, you understand. They needed to get Dak Prescott renegotiated. What's he count against the cap right now? $40+ million? How can you do anything when you got a quarterback that's counting against the cap? I'm not talking about salary. because there are now a whole bunch of quarterbacks in the league that make $40 million. But $40 million counting against the cap coming into a year is completely untenable. I thought that Jerry would have gotten a deal done, either moved on from and just given up the Dak experiment. He can't win in the playoffs. Boom, we got to get out. Or they do what you need to get it done so that you bring this year's cap down and you got to extend and go into the future and voidable years or whatever. How did they get to the opening of free agency with Dak still counting $41 million against the cap?
So it's actually closer to 55 now. so they got here because I think there's a chance that Jerry's willing to let him play out that final year of his deal. And so, to your point, even if they don't,
you can't say all in.
Of course.
That's a legitimate way to do it. Say, all right, we're gonna we'll stay as we is. Dak's got one more shot. Then if not, we move on. Okay, but then you can't go. We're all in and get your fan base excited about being aggressive in free agency.
Why he said that, and I would hope that he knew what the fan base, the way that they would take it. I also think that he meant all in, as in the fact of if you don't get a Dak contract done, this could be his last year. Mike Zimmer, the new DC, only signed a one-year deal. Mike McCarthy's in the final year of his deal. A bunch of these free agents are signing our one-year deals. There's a lot of other guys on the team same way. So to him, it's all in on this year because if they don't finally have that playoff success, things will change greatly next season, which I don't believe, by the way. I don't think that they will because, to your point, with him being so conservative, I don't see him making wild swings. And with the Dak contract, even if you don't get Dak's deal done, you want to let him play under that final year because you don't know for sure. You've seen the 8 years. You don't know. Let's say that he won't say this publicly, but let's say Jerry Jones said behind the scenes, let's let him play this out. I don't know if this is the guy for sure. Never have said that. Never have heard that from him or anybody in the organization on or off the record. But let's just say he was thinking that. We'll get CeeDee Lamb done. CeeDee Lamb's not going anywhere.
Yeah,
you know exactly where CeeDee Lamb needs to get paid. You're not going to nickel and dime CeeDee Lamb. Not after every year he's been with you. Every one of his stats has increased significantly. He's one of the top. If you're the harshest critic of CeeDee Lamb, you still think he's one of the top 6 or 7 receivers in the league. And his agent can argue he's one of the top 2 or 3. So you know where that contract should fall. So if you get that done, you have some wiggle room. So the fact that that isn't getting done yet either, it makes it difficult for them to have said all in. They should, looking back on it, never should have been said.
Nope.
No, that was a bad way to phrase it. I love the fact I think they were almost trolling at some point when the Cowboys were the last team to come to an agreement with a player, and then it was the long snapper. I thought that was a little cherry on top of the sundae for the fan base. But you know, Dan Quinn going to Washington, he's taking a bunch of people with him. When you look at this team, plenty to go in the offseason. Obviously, a lot of times these deals, we all know you're going to see some of these high-level free agents. They're going to be back on the market in 2 years, John, because they're B-level talents getting A-level money. That's sort of like how free agency works, and they don't meet the expectations. You got to build through the draft. How much of a hit on the field have the Cowboys taken to this point? Still a very good football team, right? In theory.
Absolutely. Now, they've taken a hit, but the thing is that because they haven't done anything in free agency and the fan base is so frustrated, and deservedly so, of the way that they lost, to the Packers in a game that they should never have lost that game with everything, the way that the season set up, how healthy they were playing at home, whatever. But that gets the fan base frustrated. But then it's extra frustrating when you're not doing anything in free agency and then you see players going to other teams. So it's just kind of this melting pot for people to be furious with the Cowboys. But I will say this, of the players they lost, if they told me, and I believe if they told any fans that they were like, we're going to remove Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones for this offseason, we're going to allow you to run the team, you're going to get the full benefit of our coaching staff, our scouting staff, Will McClay, everything. But Jerry and Stephen will be out of the way. You'll be the final decision maker. I honestly don't think anybody that they've lost, anybody would bring back when you sat down with all the cap guys and everything like that, because it's like you said, it's paying guys higher than what you should be paying those guys. And if you're Washington, you have to do that. You have to give Dorrance Armstrong that deal, and Tyler Biadasz, and Tennessee giving that contract to Tony Pollard. Heck, even the Tyron Smith deal that just got done on Friday, with him going to the Jets, like, it could be worth up to $20 million. It'll probably maybe be 10 to 12, whatever. If Tyron Smith can give you 15, 16 games, yeah, that sounds great. But that's the thing with Tyron Smith. You just never know because he's dealt with these injuries every single season since 2015. So it's like, I understand everybody wants to pile on the Cowboys right now because they're not doing anything, and they had an incredibly disappointing, again, finish in the postseason. Like, I don't know that, like, I look at what's out there and what was done, and I'm just like, if your job was on the line and you were the GM of the Cowboys, I don't know if you're keeping any of those guys on those price tags either. You're probably trying to make a trade or do something a little bit more in free agency than the Cowboys have done up to this point. But I don't look at like what they've lost, particularly to the Commanders, and go, oh, well, now the pecking order's changed. It's the Eagles, Washington, New York, and then Dallas. Like, it's still going to be the Eagles and Dallas in this division. I don't see anything that's changing that.
Probably so, but I did just get a text from Skip Ellis saying, tell Machota we're talking about Tony Pollard here. So he thinks Tony Pollard is worth that money. And that's fine if you think Tony Pollard got overpaid. Guess what? The price of poker in the running back game went up, and the Titans weren't the only ones who did it. The Eagles did it. The Packers did it to get their hands on Jamal Adams. So you got to be with the trend. You got to be able to follow the trend. And I don't think Pollard was blatantly overpaid. We'll find out over time. But the more important question is who's going to run the football for the Cowboys next year? You can say, oh, sorry, that was too much. We're not paying that. But then you got to hand the football off to someone who's going to be that person for the Dallas Cowboys next year.
Well, I mean, running back is kind of a young man's game. So you could draft a running back in the second.
How old is Pollard?
That's a good question. He's in, I don't know, late 20s, mid to late 20s.
Okay.
I mean, Tony Pollard was good, don't get me wrong.
Is Christian McCaffrey screwed? Because I think he's in his late 20s now.
Well,
I will say if he ever performed like Christian McCaffrey, he would remain a Cowboy. I think that Tony Pollard was a good back, but I don't think he was anything that would make you not, like I said, draft a running back in the second or third round. And then there's always ways, I feel like, at running back that, like I go back to that the deal that the Bucs got done. I go back to that year with Tom Brady, like to get Leonard Fournette, like. I always think that you'll be able to get another running back. The key though is that you're going to have to do something in the draft. And really, to be honest with you, they should have done something last year in the draft because they knew that this is where it was going with the running back position. They had parted ways last offseason with Zeke. You had Tony Pollard left on that 1-year franchise tag. They needed to draft a running back last year in the second or third round. And when those picks came to them, they didn't like the running backs were there. And so now they're in a really tough spot. And so, yeah, and it's a running game that wasn't very good last year. So, yeah, they're not looking great at running back at all. But I do think that if you have the right decision maker making the right decisions, I do think you can piece running back together. But it's not just running back with this team. They need to fix their offensive line or it ain't going to matter who they're going to have back there.
Yeah, losing, as you mentioned, a couple starters on the offensive line. Tony's going to be 27 draft time. So right about April. Late April, he's going to be 27. But I'm interested, John, how Cowboy fans look at the Eagles right now and what they're doing. And since we talked about the running back, the Eagles brought in a running back who's 27, Saquon Barkley. A lot more touches than Tony Pollard, though, over the years. I think he's at 1,500 total. And you guys just went through a very good back, as you mentioned, Ezekiel Elliott. When does that wear and tear? When did you start noticing it? Do you even remember when you started saying, well, because Zeke had a lot of traffic for a lot of years. And that's just the nature of that position. Once the mileage turns over, the dissension comes quick. Are Cowboy fans fearing Saquon Barkley or looking at the Eagles and saying, that's not a good decision?
Oh, I think any truthful Cowboys fan would say that they're fearing it because when Saquon Barkley's been healthy, you know what he can produce. And while the wins haven't been there for Saquon Barkley versus the Cowboys, I think most Cowboys fans know that, yeah, he was playing on subpar Giants teams. Now you put him on this team that has been clearly your biggest rival for the last decade, maybe more, in the division, well, and overall. So they're not going to like that. But the other part of it is, too, is as much as Cowboys fans, hate the Eagles, there's no question they're jealous of the way the Eagles operate in the front office. It's not like Howie Roseman hits on every move he makes, but he's aggressive. And when they make a mistake or they don't get a good return on an investment, they don't sit there and go, okay, well, we're not doing anything anymore. They go and they make the next move. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't follow the Dallas Cowboys closely, let's say you're just an overall NFL or just sports fan, I think your perception would be, oh, well, that's probably what the Cowboys do too. They got this Jerry Jones. Everybody knows who he is.
Yeah.
He's this wildcatter, oil man. Like everybody, well, yeah, in the 90s, yeah, but not in the last decade. He hasn't been like that in really any of his decisions. So because of that, I do think that there's probably some jealousy that, man, I wish our organization was like this, that was making these moves and being bold and doing things like that, because the excuse used to be, well, they haven't paid their quarterback yet. Well, they paid Jalen Hurts, so you can't use that excuse anymore. Nope. And they're not nickel and diming the players they're getting. They're going out there and they're making significant investments in some players that, hey, there's no guarantee that those players hit, whereas the Cowboys are being a little bit more safe than I think most people would expect.
Prime example of what you said, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They chose not to pay him last year. They let him walk out the door. They missed him badly. They paid him this year. They didn't live on their, oh, we made our decision on the player. No, you reevaluate your player and you change your position if you need to. And Howie Roseman is very good at that. You are right. Leighton Vander Esch going to re-sign with the Cowboys. They released him basically to tell Eric Kendricks, hey, if you don't want to take San Francisco's money, you can come join your own defense coordinator down here. Come on. Dallas, no state tax. You know how much they tax you in California? I don't know how they got him done, but they did. They got him down there. Does that write Vander Esch's ticket out of town, or you think they got a chance to bring him back?
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I think it's more of he was dealing with his neck issue, and I think there's a lot of questions about if he'll ever play in the NFL again. This might be it for him, and I think the writing was kind of on the wall, just because he's dealt with some neck and spine issues back and things like that throughout his career. It's just something that they kind of knew going in. And so because of that, that's where I'm kind of, just from the things I've heard, that I don't know if it's not just playing with the Cowboys. He might not be playing anymore. Why didn't
they do it earlier in the offseason? Why'd they wait till into free agency to go, all right, now we got to walk away from Leighton Vander Esch, who's probably not going to play again?
I know. So there's a lot of details with the way he was let go. It wasn't your traditional release. It had something to do with being failed physical. And I know a lot of people that don't like the Cowboys are probably not going to want to hear this, but from my perspective, just talking to some people, it sounds like the Cowboys might have done him a solid in terms of money and things like that, because it could be it for him. So I know the Cowboys are the villain to a lot of people, but I think they might have done right by him as a player. But that might have been why it got delayed a little bit.
Okay.
Because he is a team leader guy, and I do think that they wanted to do right by him to a certain extent. The Eric Kendricks thing makes sense from a perspective just because of the Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer takes over this defense. He's only got a one-year deal. He needs to get some of his guys in here, much like Dan Quinn getting his guys into Washington. And with Kendricks, there was some communication issues last year, especially after Vander Esch went down, with the guy, whoever was going to be wearing the green dot, the microphone or the headset. And so with Kendricks, you have that leader. He's going to know how to quarterback this defense, get guys in the right spot, even though, he's not going to be the all-pro player he was in, 2019. But I do think that was a wise move. You're just kind of sitting back going, okay, so you need some more of those moves. So maybe they happen this week, second week of free agency, but there needs to be more action than what we've seen so far, that's for sure.
I'm shocked, John, that Mike signed a one-year deal. I mean, we all know Mike McCarthy's year to year by this point, and Mike loves the Joneses, and I think it's vice versa. So that factors in as a part of it. He's interesting to me because early in Minnesota, I mean, he was off the charts and it was Kendricks and Anthony Barr, who was a Cowboy for a little bit as well. And with the A-gap stuff and the blitzing, they had I think it was a top 3 defense 3 consecutive years under Mike Zimmer until it started to fall off a little bit. And he was the copycat guy. We got to copy Mike Zimmer. Now it's Vic Fangio, goes to Tony Dungy back in the day. He was one of those copycat guys. Are people excited about getting Mike Zimmer back in Dallas?
They're excited because most people, myself included, believe that it's a good fit to have kind of a hard-nosed guy come in there, and maybe there's a little bit more, not to say the team was undisciplined last year, but maybe just a change. Just when you keep running into the same issues in January, year after year. I mean, hey, it's great that you win 12 games during the regular season the last 3 years. I mean, that shows you that you obviously have good talent. You obviously have good coaching, or you wouldn't be able to do that back years. But to not be able to get it done in January, something's missing there. And so it just seems like he would be a little bit of a shakeup in the coaching staff. But my issue with that is when you say a one-year deal, how much can you really get away with if you're a coach in terms of like really getting into
Yeah,
guys, ripping
I
guys?
agree.
When they can just sit there and go, you're not even going to be here next year.
Yeah.
I'm not going anywhere. So I don't know how much of that you can do, but I think that he is a very successful NFL coach, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And so it'll be interesting. I mean, this key things is just how well does he utilize Micah Parsons, and he's got to get something out of Mazi Smith, last year's first-round pick, because they got nothing last year, and their run defense is just continues to be an issue.
Boy,
if you don't have anything out of Mazi, you're in a lot of trouble.
And Micah Parsons, if he brings the A-gap stuff back, Micah Parsons doing that, yeah, that might be something to watch. That might be defensive player of the year stuff if he uses him the way he used to use, say, Anthony Barr back in the day. It'll be interesting to see.
But here's my Micah Parsons question then. How's he going to be hit? How's he going to handle being franchise tagged? Because the Cowboys continue to show, well, cap management, we do it the way we do it, might not understand it. I can just see him slapping a franchise tag on Micah Parsons. He's not afraid to speak his mind. He's one of these guys in the NFL. I say this all the time, John. You don't have to listen to it because you just come on when we ask you to come on as a guest. McMullen's got to listen to this crap all the time when I say it. NFL players can be stupid. They go on podcasts and they think they're just sitting there talking to their friend. And they don't realize, no, this is being broadcast for everyone on the planet to hear thereafter. They don't even comprehend it. Either they don't care or they don't pay attention. And Mike has done it a couple of times now. He sits down with a buddy on a podcast. He said something that comes back to be overanalyzed thereafter afterwards. What's he going to be like when they slap a franchise tag on him? How many podcasts is he going to show up and go nuts on?
So Jody, I've actually heard you make this point. I was getting something to eat a few weekends ago, Saturday night, when you were doing
on CBS. Okay.
Yes, you were doing your other job, and you brought that up, and it was funny because you're so right about it with the Micah thing, because at the Super Bowl, or right after the Super Bowl, him and CeeDee Lamb, CD jumped on his podcast, and CD's eating food and he's super relaxed, and it was some of the best stuff he'd said. So for me, like, I was on vacation too. It was like a late Friday night, and I'm sitting there and I'm at my hotel room, and I see on my phone that I get the alert that Bleacher Report, like, Mike is gonna do his podcast. I'm like, man, it's like 9 o'clock at night. I'm surprised. Whatever. CD sits down. I immediately start recording. I'm like typing up stuff. I'm like, man, this is the best CD's been, about his contract, about the team, what they did wrong, what happened against Green Bay. I was like. So for me, I'm kind of like, I know it's going that way more and more in our business, as long as they still need to talk during the week to us, but it's like one of those things where I'm like, oh, I'll listen to this. I can write off this. That's fine.
Yeah.
But to your point, yes, if they were to sit there and drag this out, he will certainly be vocal about it. The only thing I will say about that is he's been vocal throughout his career, but he still is there on Sundays. He's going to have to be there on Sundays. Right. Even no matter how upset he is, he'll still have to show up on Sundays and play. Now, granted, I do think he's an easy contract to figure out, because he needs, whenever that comes up, as long as he's healthy, he deserves to be paid like one of the highest, if not the highest, defensive players in the game. That's just what's going to happen. And then somebody will pass him, but he's performed to a level that, I mean, if you're gonna give one person credit, or the most credit, for them being 3 consecutive 12-win seasons, it's Micah Parsons. It's since the day they drafted him. And with that, there comes other credit. Mike McCarthy was obviously a big part of that. Dan Quinn utilizing Micah the right way. But Micah Parsons on the field is the biggest reason that they've been able to have that consistency, because he's been such a force on defense. So, I don't see them moving on from him or trading him or going in another direction. So if he's going to be here, get that deal done.
Yeah, that was such an interesting year for the NFC East, because the Eagles moved up in the draft. The Cowboys moved down. The Eagles got Devontae Smith. The Cowboys got Micah Parsons. The Giants are the ones who got screwed because they wanted Devontae Smith. They traded down and got Kadarius Toney. So it's always the poor New York Giants. I bring that up because the draft is going to be huge. And I'll end it there with you at John Machota. Make sure you follow John on X, Twitter, whatever you call it these days. Read him at The Athletic. Does a tremendous job about them Cowboys, the podcast as well. John, Will McClay is one of the best draft guys in the business. Is he the most important part of that organization? And I say that because they're not doing a lot of stuff in free agency. So it's got to be about, you mentioned the 2 offensive line positions. They got to find some way to fill those spots. It's usually going to be the draft, and they've hit on a lot of draft picks comparatively to a number of teams. Even you mentioned Vander Esch, and I know what year was that with Michael Gallup, who just left. Until the injuries, those guys were looking. They've done a very good job identifying talent. Is it Will more than the Joneses?
Oh, yeah, nobody's more important than Will McClay. And, I mean, you just look at the way that this roster's been built. It's almost all been through the draft, and that's his baby. That's what he's been in charge of. I mean, he's been with the organization for a long time, but since 2014, that's when he took over. He was in charge of the draft, and I understand that their last year's draft, they didn't get much out of it in terms of immediate contributions. They need more from that class. They can't have another class like that this year. Too much is riding on it. But if you got to depend on somebody, there's not many to depend on that I can think of that I would want to over Will McClay. I mean, he's been around the league a long time, and he has a great eye for talent. And then the other thing is that he's a really good just communicator, people person. Anybody you talk to in the organization will tell you about that, and which is always so difficult because, you know, your scouts are working 365 to get, you know, the best. You know, these are going to be the best guys for our situation. But then the coaching staff comes in and they want certain things. So you have to kind of meld that together. And he's the middleman on all of that. And I think that, and he also is a major evaluator on any type of signing they do. They're not doing that 4th round pick for Trey Lance if Will McClay isn't like, no, we really like what he could be, whatever. Like, they're not just doing that on a whim. Jerry knows that Will likes a certain player or he isn't going to make a move like that. So, yeah, if that's the thing, people are always so concerned. If you're not going to give him the GM title, what if Will takes it somewhere else? And he's interviewed with other teams.
Yeah,
he is very close to the Jones family, so I don't think he would do that. But yeah, he would be a huge loss.
Jody, you're muted.
I coughed there and I forgot to unmute myself. Thank you for that, John. John, we had you on a couple weeks ago when the Eagles hired Kellen Moore as their offensive coordinator. You gave us some really good insight and info with him. And if I've already asked this question, I apologize for re-asking it, but it needs to be re-asked because the dynamic changed a little bit. Eagles added Saquon Barkley, paid a lot of money for Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, one of his strengths is he's very good catching the ball out of the backfield. It hasn't been a strength for Jalen Hurts the last 3 years. Will it be with Kellen Moore? Is that a big part of Kellen Moore's offense, a significant part? A medium part, yeah, you got to do it to keep the other team honest type part. Using the back out of the backfield, asking his quarterback to be able to make those passes and be good at it. How much of that is a part of Kellen Moore's bag of tricks?
I think it's going to be a huge part of it. I mean, you know, he was around when they obviously had some success with Zeke and Dak and things like that. Jalen is still more of a runner than Dak, I think, ever was. And so I think it's going to be tough to compare to what he's done in the past because I don't think he's had quite the running quarterback that he does now. And so I think that he's going to open some things up and do some things a little bit different way. I mean, they got a lot of ways that they can hurt you now. He's got a lot of weapons. This is going to be huge for Kellen Moore's career, what he can do with this group. And I know that they, you know, obviously lose Kelsey, but the weapons they have on offense and the creativity he can do with all of that, I do expect him to use Barkley in a variety of ways, throwing him out of the backfield, allowing him to, you know, find ways to get him in space and be a playmaker. There's no way you do that deal unless you don't think he's going to be a major part of whatever you're doing offensively. And so I would be surprised if it didn't have success. I mean, I would say the only thing I could see from the Eagles that you might have an issue is that maybe it gets to a point where people aren't happy because they're not getting the ball enough because there's so many, you know, playmakers over there. But I think that's a good problem to have. And I've always thought a lot of Kellen Moore. I think he's going to have a lot of success with this group. I think he's going to be an NFL head coach. But I don't know. It's tough to say what he'll do with this particular group because this might be the best collection he's had to work with. So he's got to be pretty excited about that. But with that comes obviously a lot of pressure too, because if he doesn't have success there, I mean, there's no question that Eagles fan base will eat him up.
All right, whether it's a infrequent Cowboy move or an interpretation of what all in means, or finding out what Michael Parsons said on his latest podcast, that's why you read John Machota at The Athletic. He's got it all covered for you if you're any kind of a Cowboy fan or Cowboy hater. Either way, you get the info from John Machota and or when he hops on with us like he did today. Thank you very much, JM. We'll talk.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, guys. Have a good day.
Sean.
John Machota, The Athletic, here with us on Birds 365.
John's all in. I know that. He's all in.
All in on what? You got to
covering the Cowboys.
Covering the Cowboys. He is all in. You are 100% right, McMullen. He is all in. Somebody's got to explain to Jerry what all in means.
Tony Khan's all in. That's the name of his big pay-per-view. He's all in.
All in. Yeah. Again, some people would argue the definition of all in on that one too. All right, he's McMullen. I'm McDonald. Quickie timeout. Gonna come back and put a bow on the show.